A desperate Navajo mother, widowed and weary, is nabbed pilfering provisions. Yet rather than fury, the barren homesteader extends compassion that alters their destinies forever. What he uncovers beyond the solitary ridges at first light will shatter your spirit and reveal the raw essence of compassion amid the untamed frontier. Catch the complete tale and remember to hit like and subscribe. All right, let's dive in. The breeze had calmed across the New Mexico Badlands that evening, leaving just the gentle whisper of parched weeds scraping along the barriers. Elias Thorne had passed the previous hour securing the cords on the enclosure, ensuring the steeds were protected from jackals. As he headed back to the stable, lamps dangling from his belt, he heard a subtle shuffling noise, too faint for a beast, too tentative for a bandit who knew his trade. Elias halted, squinting into the shadows. Somebody was out there. Somebody in dire straits. The sort of vibe a fellow on the plains instinctively picks up before laying eyes on it. He advanced cautiously, careful not to spook whoever lurked by the supply hut. The pale moonbeams traced the silhouette of a petite form hunkered down behind the feed bags. When he hoisted his lamp, the glow exposed a slender Navajo widow, her breaths quivering as though the darkness itself unnerved her. Grit stuck to her garments, and her locks tumbled in matted wisps across her features. She went rigid the instant she sensed she'd been spotted, her gaze bulging with dread and something profound, regret. Before Elias could utter a word, the woman raised her palms into the chilly night, facing out in submission. Her digits shook and her tone fractured as she murmured, "Please don't harm me." The plea emerged like it had been wrung from a soul who'd exhausted every path ages ago. Elias's light bathed her countenance in a golden hue, unveiling the weariness etched into her lines. She didn't look like a lawbreaker. She appeared like a fighter in her final stand. "My little ones are famished," she confessed, anguish piercing her poise. I had no other way." Elias sensed the bite of her admission deep in his ribs. The borderlands were merciless. Far too many bereft spouses, too many waifs, too many tales of folks wasting away in quiet agony. He'd witnessed gents pilfer from avarice, rage, or brutality, but this was worlds apart. This lady's terror wasn't self-centered. It was for the tiny bellies lingering elsewhere, beseeching their maw to return bearing a morsel, and he scrapped to sustain them through the frosty gloom. Elias wasn't heartless, but he was wary. Decades of tending the spread solo had sharpened his vigilance toward any soul straying onto his turf after dusk. Still, an authenticity in her stare, one that couldn't be staged, halted him from lashing out like so many landowners might. She wasn't fibbing, she wasn't feigning, she was fracturing, and the frontier had a knack for devouring folks entirely once they hit that brink. Elias dipped his lantern a touch, easing his posture. He spotted her trying to conceal the feed pouch with her knee as if dreading he'd snatched the sole lifeline for her offspring. But rather than bellowing or grabbing the lasso draped over a close peg, Elias eased ahead and shrugged off his jacket. "Wait!" she breathed, recoiling, bracing for the blow. But Elias merely draped the garment over her quaking form. Her eyes flared in bewilderment as coziness enveloped her. Her inhalation steadied, though she eyed him warily, pondering if she could lean into the startling tenderness. Elias crouched to level their heights. "What's your name?" he inquired softly. His timbre gentler than she had anticipated from a solitary dweller on the brutal expanses. It lingered a beat before she replied, as if even sharing that might exact a toll. "Lila," she managed finally, her words a mere sigh. She gripped the jacket fiercely, knuckles whitening against the wool like it was the inaugural shred of refuge she'd clutched in ages. Elias inclined his head deliberately, echoing her name as if it held weight. The longer he studied her, the plainer it grew. She hadn't come to stir chaos. Her face was gaunt, her mouth chapped from spells sans decent sustenance or moisture. She bore the mark of one who'd shouldered fortitude overlong. "Where are your young ones?" Elias probed kindly. Lila gazed toward the far-off bluffs, silent at first. A sliver of her yearned to confide. Another recalled every peril she'd braved. At length, she murmured, "They're holding on. Haven't had a bite since the day prior."
The confession quavered with remorse, alarm, and a parent's resolve. Elias eyed the feed sack she'd aimed to nab once more. It amounted to scant, a handful of days' endurance, tops. But to her it spelled existence. He could nearly envision her wee charges curled up someplace, trembling in the icy void, fretting if she'd reappear. A shift stirred within him, an echo of sorrow he'd reckoned interred deep. He and his departed bride Isabella had once envisioned offspring, of giggles echoing through their abode, of minuscule shoes lined by the hearth. Yet existence withheld that boon. Now, beholding Lila, a vestige of softness and yearning resurfaced. A puff of air swept Grit over the grounds, and Lila tugged the jacket snugger about her lean build. Elias drew in air and resolved, driven not by obligation, but by a profounder call. "Walk with me," he suggested, rising and proffering his palm. Lila gaped at it, taken aback. "Why?" she queried, bewilderment and suspicion threading her speech. Elias had no grudge. The realm hadn't spared souls like hers. "Because," he replied plainly, "no young'un on my ground starves, not this eve." His tone bore no wrath, merely a firm benevolence she hadn't encountered in eons. Gradually, reluctantly, Lila slipped her hand into his. Her touch was icy and delicate, but Elias cradled it tenderly. As he led her to the cabin, he caught the shimmer in her eyes. Not dread now, but the tiniest flicker of possibility. For the premier instance in moons, she ceased fleeing, concealing, or battling. She was aided. The mere gesture of strolling alongside another sans scorn or suspicion eased her frame, quieted her pulse. Elias perceived her faith budding, delicate and brittle, like a fledgling spark in the chill. Within the dwelling, the hearth's ready gleam thawed Lila's wary facade. Elias gestured to a chair, ladled her a mug of heated brew, and granted her space to compose. She cradled it in both palms like a treasure. "Thank you," she husked, the phrase catching in her gullet. Elias dipped his chin. Gratitude wasn't sought. What counted was that, amid those bluffs, 2 ravenous tots would sleep this night, assured their dam hadn't let them down. And unbeknownst to him, the instant he'd unearthed her by that feed sack had ignited a shift, one he couldn't halt. The initial rays of daybreak skimmed the New Mexico bluffs as Elias Thorne cinched his mount's girth and beckoned Lila onward. The atmosphere nipped sharply, and soil billowed with each measured tread she made. Her chin stayed dipped, her posture rigid as though he anticipated he'd reconsider any second and haul her off in irons. Elias gave her no haste. He cantered alongside in hush, permitting the serenity of daybreak to melt the strain betwixt them. He harbored no designs to chasten her. He merely wanted to witness the reality firsthand. Lila darted sidelong peeks his way. She still couldn't fathom why he hadn't hollered, struck, or bound her as fellow homesteaders might. His quiet tune daunted her near as fiercely as his grace. Every stride toward the bluffs weighed with doubt. When he at last voiced, his timbre was resolute yet mild. "Lead me to your young." Lila froze mid-step, her pulse thundering in her ears. Navajo mothers didn't yield faith to pale settlers easily, not after the scars she'd borne. But this gent had granted clemency unbidden. She wavered just long enough for him to fancy she'd bolt, but she held. With a shallow sigh, Lila assented. She veered onto the craggy trail, snaking past the crest. Elias marked her deliberate footsteps, how her sight swept the earth for treacherous rocks. She was seasoned in stealthy passage, and enduring a terrain that tendered naught but peril. The bluffs steepened in their ascent, and Elias beheld the ravage famine had wrought on her. Her gait lagged, her gasps faltered, but she pressed on. Not for her sake, but for the small souls ahead. Nigh an hour's trek Lila brought to a huddle of eroded stones. She indicated a derelict lean-to, scarcely discernible through a fringe of thorny scrub. The frail abode sagged askew, bereft of half its cover, as if forsaken by fate epochs past. Elias swung down and trailed her soundlessly. The nearer they drew, the keener the chill bit. Lila tarried at the threshold, pressing her palm to the timber like an anchor.
Then she nudged it ajar. Within, the muted gleam disclosed two diminutive shapes nestled close, swathed in threadbare pelts. The youngsters' visages were ashen from want, their stares lackluster with fatigue. But the second they spied their mother, a glow ignited within. They lurched to her, tottering into her embrace with muted wails of solace. Leela sank to her haunches, enfolding them fiercely, murmuring in Navajo phrases Elias couldn't parse. No matter, he grasped the sentiment wholly. The tots latched to her limbs, nuzzling into her garb as if dreading her vanishing anew. Elias felt a pang in his breast, a lingering grief he'd entombed since his spouse's demise years back. Beholding the trio knit so stirred a profundity in him, a sensation he deemed vanished. He recalled Isabella, her tender grin, her vision of their haven brimming with youthful mirth. They'd yearned, supplicated, lingered, but Providence had stayed mute. And now, gazing on Leela and her fledglings in that ramshackle hut, Elias sensed an odd, unforeseen tug, as if existence proffered a mending for his inner fractures. Yet he voiced none of it. Instead, he strode to his pony and fetched the provisions he'd borne. Wordlessly, he arrayed rations, canteens, and toasty coverings on the dirt floor. Leela observed with saucer eyes, incredulous. The youngsters peered too, their wee grips tentative on the blanket's edge, as if querying their right to it. Elias snapped off a morsel of loaf and proffered it softly to the tiniest lad. The boy paused, seeking Leela's nod. She granted it, and he accepted the crumb gingerly, his slight fingers quivering with thanks. Elias felt the scene's gravity drape him like a soothing shawl, unbidden. Leela rediscovered her tongue at last, though it wavered. Why? She posed, scarce above a hush. Why aid us? Her query hauled lifetimes of woe, lifetimes of marginalization, pursuit, verdict, and solitary striving. Elias locked gazes with her, discerning not mere alarm, but the echoes of a resilient soul who'd weathered the unbearable. He hunkered by the young, aiding the elder lass in donning the coverlet. He uttered low, as if to a reminiscence as to Leela. Because no young'un on my ground starves, not if I can hinder it. His declaration infused the space like a soft ember, banishing the frosts where the tots had quaked overnight. Leela regarded him as if unraveling if his benevolence endured or ebbed with the dawn. But Elias's mien held steady. He moved not from alms, sorrow, or onus. A hushed, long-dormant core steered him. Leela averted her sight, swamped with ease and bafflement. For the first span in moons, she inhaled free of terror. The children nibbled deliberately, relishing each morsel, as if it might prove their finale. Elias monitored them keenly, guarding they paced themselves. Leela perched adjacent, her palm a shield on their spines. She flicked glances his way, still hazed if this haven outlasted the hour. Elias divined her unease. He stepped out, surveying the expanse for lurking harms. Upon re-entering, he beheld the unexpected, a shy curve on the girl's lips as she burrowed into the coverlet. The orb climbed, its glow flooding the lean-to and stirring motes in the beams. Elias inhaled deeply, grasping his path, veered uncharted. He couldn't revert to his lonesome, hollow spread for tending ignorance of the sight. These young'un had etched into his core in heartbeats. Leela rose mute, her offspring propped against her. She faced Elias with thanks laced in dubicity, poised for his word. Elias issued no edicts, no claims, no pleas. He merely tilted his head their way. And in that wordless tilt, he pledged what he scarcely fathomed, a vow that their burdens needn't be solitary borne. The frontier was brutal, relentless, and oft savage. But in that instant, within that tattered shelter, as morn's sun kindled the breeze, Elias Torn elected otherwise. Something mortal, something restorative, something whole. And though none grasped it then, this dawnbreak heralded a tie that would recast their threads eternally.